And so we have today as our speaker Dr. Andy Gibbons. Hi, thanks. I'm glad to be here today. It's good. Yes, Dr. Gibbons is a noted expert and textbook author, and we're glad to have, oh, now you're embarrassing me. Stop. Okay, so Dr. Gibbons, take it away. Okay, well, what I'd like to do today is...
Did we record that? That was brilliant.
Got it.
Never lose your sense of play. We want to talk about something really serious, so I brought some Rube Goldberg pictures with me. And I thought we would talk a little bit about Rube Goldberg and the implications of Rube Goldberg. Take a look at your diagram here. And what we have is, what is the function of this? Now you guys all know Rube Goldberg made machines, little machines that accomplished some trivial purpose with an elaborate infrastructure. What is this machine for? What does it accomplish?
I'm up to I.
Yeah,
Come on in.
It looks like
There's
this
room
bird.
up here or up here, either one.
Worm.
I think it makes the man move.
Any extras, by the way?
Over there, next to Brian.
He can read this.
That make him walk forward.
Brian?
Oh. I don't know what happens after it gets warm. I don't know what that is.
Then pull on this, we pull this down.
Oh, so it's
So it threads the worm on
Yes,
the
they should.
shade.
Gets the worm, the
ball
shade
has to
goes
go
down.
over.
Shade goes down.
That gives him shade.
What's in his pocket?
It's a letter.
Oh, this is Rube, huh?
Oh, yeah.
Rube.
It must go in the
The
mailbox
mail-
somehow.
Somehow the bird goes out,
Pulls down and
The worm.
and I don't see how the letter gets into the
I
mailbox.
know. I'm trying.
Magic happens.
Unless the bird
Maybe
doesn't
it's
get
a
the
He
map.
didn't get that
It's
far.
a map of where the mailbox is.
Maybe it's
For
that.
very slow people.
Maybe it's a late bird instead of an early bird. I don't know.
The bird pulls it out of the
I like
pocket and
that
hands it to the
interpretation.
worm, and the worm sticks it in.
Maybe that's it.
Yeah, birds and worms cooperate.
That is if the bird doesn't eat the worm first.
Okay, now, if you were, we look at it and we look at these familiar objects doing familiar things. You see the boot kicking the football, we all. But if you were an engineer, what do you see happening here? What is actually going on inside of a machine like this?
Wait,
What is the whole thing work?
force.
What, huh?
Transfer force?
One thing is transferring force to another thing, is communicating force to another, and so forth down the line until something happens at the end of the line, right? What does that have to do with instruction and the design of instruction?
it means to me that there's a lot of things that could go wrong.
Yeah, if you got the wrong worm, or if the worm's dead.
Complex process.
I want you to think about, Scott?
So, I mean, in most cases, we aren't like, we didn't create the information, we're just kind of, in a way, transmitting it to the next generation or to someone else. So like, in a way, it's like a second-hand copy of the original, and then like just so on and so forth.
Things that you think set off things that you do, those set off other things that you do, that causes something else to happen, causes something else to happen, and down the end of the line, somebody receives a jolt of energy in some form, and something happens. Jolts of energy that come in through our eyes and ears not only deal with our intellect, but deal with our emotions, don't they? Yes, Wendy?
Using your Explore Explain design framework, there's a lot of variables that go into a Rube Goldberg machine and into learning, so you need to explore what those variables are, explain how they relate to one another, and then you can design something to effectively use those variables.
That's a good observation. Okay, so let's stop and think of this in instructional terms. Let's pass these back that way. Let's pass these down around here, and let's pass these down over here.
Yeah.
Let's stop and talk. What kinds of things do we do in a classroom or in an instructional design? What are some of the stock phrases that we use? Just name some things that we do in a class, in a classroom, in a piece of instruction that's been designed. Well, teach, that's a broad term. What else? Let's get atomistic here. Let's get as atomistic as we can.
Write on the whiteboard.
Right on the whiteboard. You talk. How many different modes of talk are there? Huh? A lot. So tell me some of the modes of talk.
Discuss.
Discuss.
Lecture.
Lecture.
Questions?
Present. Ask questions.
Respond.
Okay. Now, all these things we do in a class, how do we know what to do at any given time? How do we decide what to do at any given time?
Well, if the boot has hit me and I'm getting watered on my coattails and, no, I'm just kidding, sorry.
Yeah, the boots kicked the football already, and so what you're saying is that what you do at any given moment may depend on what just happened a minute ago. Okay, so let's look. I made a special study just for you guys. I put together a list, and it's in table 7.2 of actions that happen during instruction that impart energy in some way. Are you familiar with 7.2?
Is it where it says insert 7.2 here?
No, it's
One
where
more
7.2
page.
Okay.
One more page. I get that.
I see the table.
I am shocked. I'm more curious to find it. 7.2. Okay. So these are acts. These are acts that we do during instruction. And each one of them imparts energy in a certain way, right? For instance, I can acknowledge, I can acquaint, I can activate, I can address, I can adjourn class, I can admire what somebody has done. If I say, Janelle, that paper you just wrote was so cool, does that set off a set of energies within Janelle? Or if I say, let's see, is console on here? Did I put console? No, I didn't put console.
Yeah, it's
Is it?
it's in the fifth
Console,
column.
yes. Janelle, I am really sorry that you got that F. I feel so bad about it, really. It's not, don't think of it as the end of your career, just think of it as a change of career.
Now everyone knows.
Can I, as an instructor, can I daydream in class? Can I daydream? Decide, declare, decline, decree, deduce? Okay. Now, my question is still, though, how do you know which one to do at a given time? How do you decide what to do next in instruction? I mean, there's so many things that you could do. How do you know? Is there an organizing principle of some kind? I know that there are a lot of theorists who have said, well, in my particular theory of instruction, the next thing you should do is show them an example, or you should give them a reward, or you should give them a lecture, or give them how do you know what to do next in instruction?
Students take their cues from the instructor, typically, in the classroom, whatever the instructor models or says is acceptable or has proven through past experience is socially acceptable.
So what you're saying is that there are a whole, just sitting in a room together, there's a whole set of forces already acting in the form of expectations, in the form of social norms, in the form of, for instance, when you wanted to speak, you did this part, and you said, okay, right, your turn. And so, there's got to be some organizing metaphor for instruction. There's got to be some way that helps us to decide what a good thing to do would be next, without being confined by a particular theory.
I think of it as the teacher is responsive, and so are the learners, to So maybe the teacher is more responsive to where the learners are at that specific time and their needs, but also the learners need to also be responsive to the actual learning that is occurring as well.
You're saying that things are adjusted moment by moment, that decisions, all the decisions of instruction can't be made at the time of design. They're made, some of them, a lot of them maybe, are made at the time of instruction, okay?
Yeah, so a metaphor, you mentioned the word metaphor. For me, as a jazz musician, like last Friday I was playing at a wedding with 4 guys I'd never met before. And if they had just gone moment by moment and had never, and it wouldn't base it on sound principles, like doing the expected or the unexpected, I mean, all these choices, we would never be able to communicate together, react to each other. Like, if you just went pound on the piano, random notes, there had to be some guiding structure from which to depart or not to depart.
Yes.
You know, there needs to be some sort of culture or common understanding at some point.
And it has to be in the individual's head, doesn't it? When little kids begin kindergarten, they all say, oh, my job is to sit here and to listen quietly and to raise my hand when I want to speak. And you've been in a kindergarten before, right? It's like a beehive, okay? So the structure, we actually, to get to this point, where you guys are all sitting in an orderly fashion, being respectful, okay? To get to this point, you had to learn a lot of norms, a lot of forces had to form in your head, right? But every one of you carries this cognitive DNA, as it were, that's been instructed into you, and as a matter of fact, the ones who wouldn't sit still in class and listen and take notes and take tests, they're not with us anymore, are they? Why?
Some of them are dead. They're not dead.
No, they became corporate giants. They became jobs. You know, most of the other corporate giants in America drop out from college. That's the pathway to success, by the way. You're all losers. Just being here shows me who you are. Okay, I'm going to suggest a framework. And you guys have heard me suggest this framework before. A metaphor that we should use as instructional designers to help unify individual actions and give them not only the force that every individual action has, but the combined force of the actions that went before it. It's every act that we do is not a separate individual thing. Every act builds on something that just went before it. And you can't always plan exactly what's going to happen at any given moment, at any given event during instruction. Here's the metaphor. It's conversation. Instruction is a form of conversation. Now, have we had any conversation here today? I ask questions, you respond, or sometimes you ask questions, or sometimes you have spontaneous remarks. And I couldn't plan in advance what I was going to say. I couldn't, even with my most elaborate computer-based instruction, anticipate everything that you guys were going to be thinking and reacting with. Okay, here's a danger. As designers, when we anticipate using technology, one of the things that happens is that we start to depend on the crutch that's provided by the technology, and we forget that we're designing instruction, which is a form of conversation, and the tools that we're using don't afford conversation easily. Have you noticed that? They afford, well, PowerPoint doesn't afford conversation, it affords the dispensation of information. What kinds of tools afford conversation that we have if we were designing computer-based? What kinds of tools do we have? Now, if there were a lot of them, you guys would be raising your hands and saying, oh, Flash, or oh, Java, or whoa, COBOL. Yeah, right.
Some of the online learning is getting more adaptive, so that.
Describe this.
Well,
Trend that
I'm
you've seen.
looking at
my dissertation hopefully is gonna be learning probes for an online homework situation where you ask a question and then based on their own analysis of what they understand, then you give them the next 3 or 4 whatevers. So it's adaptive to how they've answered the questions before. And that's a little bit more conversation-like than.
Yes, it is.
Than
Darren, you're familiar with speedback? You guys all know what speedback is?
Yeah.
Just describe it real quickly.
Feedback is an automated feedback and response system that's tied to grading on assessments, where students go through the assessment and based on their response they get feedback that's been pre-formatted into the database to give the students response about maybe the distractor they selected or the terminology that they used based on how they responded in the assessment.
So it's trying to understand what a person is saying to it. It's a mechanical device, but it's trying to understand. Well, it's not even trying to understand. It's just exercising its own algorithms, isn't it? And if there's an algorithm that's been provided there, okay. Now, the problem is, and you know, I gotta say that systems like this have existed since I was at Big. In the early days of computer-based instruction, which I saw, the days when you had to, in order to sell computer-based instruction services or products, you had to first go and convince the customer that a computer could be involved in instruction. Nobody believed it. They thought it was a computer it did actuarial computations, or it did, right? Is that, Anna lived through that whole phase also. But then something tilted the scale, and all of a sudden people thought the computer could be involved in instruction. So the first thing we said was, oh yeah, well let's adapt certain basic types of programmed instruction, and if the student gives answer A, we can give them this, or if they give B, we can give them this, or whatever. And so all kinds of things like that. What happens if you give, say, 3 possible responses to one question, and then each of those questions might be a multiple choice kind of thing, and so each one of those has 3. 3 times 3 times 3 times 3. How long does it take before, in 5 generations, what does that come to? 3, 9, 27. After 4 generations, you have almost 90. And after 5 generations, do you see what I'm saying? You end up having this geometrical monster that you've created. It goes like this: 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. And so by the 5th generation, you've got 3 to the 5th, whatever that turns out to be. Possible
exponential explosion.
Exponential explosion. Okay, but that gets things a little bit more conversational. How do we design things that have conversations in them? I'm going to suggest an idea. This disorganized list here has to somehow, so we have to start understanding kinds of things that you would do under certain circumstances. Okay, if instruction's a conversation, you're going to be walking along and somebody's coming down the hall, and what do you do as you see this person coming down the hall? They're a familiar face. What's the first thing you do? All the time? What if it's the principal? Or what if it's the tax collector?
You identify.
Acknowledge them.
Pretend there's a quarter on the ground.
Even before you acknowledge them, aren't you making decisions about whether or not you want to be a part of a conversation with them?
Yeah.
Now sometimes you'll come down and you'll say, oh my gosh, it's my insurance salesman, and I've already bought every policy they have, and that was very unpleasant. So, hi Wally, oh man, am I late for class? Okay, bye, see ya. Okay, so there are ways that we choose what to do at any given moment. But what if our long-lost friend from high school. All of a sudden, we want to engage, right? Oh, Wally, I'm so glad to see you. Where you been? Yeah, good. You're an insurance salesman. Oh, what a pleasant surprise. All right, now, so here's the interesting thing about conversations. It involves two people who originally weren't engaged. They're moving toward each other. But if they're going to engage in a conversation, something has to happen. Richard Collada, come in, please.
Can I crash the party?
Have you got time?
Absolutely.
This is so good to see you. Does everybody know Richard? Richard is a graduate of our department 4 or 5 years ago, and now works. Tell us. For a while, he was the technical advisor for the CIA. What are you doing now?
I work for the Department of Ed, and the best part about my job is when I get to come out and learn good stuff from good friends. So that's why I'm here.
He is so humble.
Don't let me interrupt anymore. Carry on.
Good. He's amazing. If you want to know about what's happening currently, he's the guy to talk to. So make sure you catch him at the soup kitchen. Okay, so people are coming down here. They're assessing whether or not they're going to have a conversation with each other. Okay, it's like deer in the headlights. If they decide, one person's going to decide at some point, and that person is going to incline toward the other person. There's some offer for a conversation. Now, what has to happen before the conversation can actually occur, though?
Reciprocation.
The other person has to incline also. And then you can have a conversation. Now, are there conventions for conversation? How do you start the conversation? Do you start by talking about relativity, or your latest term paper? Do you just start hammering away at what you want to say to this? First of all, do you have some kind of a plan? What you want to say to this person? If it's a social contact, don't you want to talk? You have some social goals to accomplish with this person. If this is an academic contact, you have some goals as you start to incline. Say, I'll talk to this person, and here's what I'd like to accomplish. Maybe it's just friendly contact, but maybe it's, wow, maybe I can recruit this person to come to my party, or I can recruit this person to sign up for my class. Okay, so you got a goal. You start to incline toward the person. So there's a beginning ritual, isn't there? At the beginning of the conversation. Rituals. There are patterns that we follow. There are certain kinds of things that we do at the beginning, and certain kinds of things that we don't do. Look in table. There, I even have a table for this. Okay. And I don't know right now where it is, but it's here.
7-3.
7-3.
Yeah.
That's the one right after 7-2, isn't it? Okay. All right. Look at the left column. There are certain functions that you carry out. You might attract the attention of the other person through eye contact, right?
One example I see regularly in this building from female undergrad students is squealing and running towards each other.
Well, and guys, what do the guys do? They let out a roar, or they
Yeah.
Yeah.
Big physical manifestations.
So let's not get too gender specific here.
We all have our
I just got you out of trouble, by the way. Okay. You attract the attention of the other person. You offer conversation. How do you offer conversation? You make eye contact, and then you keep eye contact. You look. You orient toward the person. You propose dimensions of engagement. How do you do that? Say, "Hi, Phil, I'd like to converse with you for a moment." No. It's all done. It's done very quickly. All these things in the left-hand column. It's done very quickly, and it's done without words, or with very few words. You propose the dimensions of the engagement. You negotiate the performance goals. Oh, you know, I wanted to talk to you about your paper that you wrote. Scott, what we,
Oh, just on the proposed dimensions engagement, is that kind of like, would you say mostly just connotation, like you begin talking about?
how long am I gonna talk to this person?
Like just like
before I
a
break
tone of
off?
voice, just what you choose for your conversational topic,
How-
if it's fluffy or.
How deep do I want this conversation to go? How much time do I have to allocate to it? How much energy, how much interest do I have in it?
Can it be done by the way, like, if you stop, or if you just keep walking, or like the, maybe direction that you're facing the person, like if you're facing the person like directly, then you want to converse. If not, like, if you keep walking, then you're not really proposing
Yeah,
engagement.
and both of you are getting some idea of how far you want this thing to go. How much time, how much interest, okay? We negotiate some strategic goals. That is, you can tell the person, oh, you know, I wanna, before we get through here, I'd like to ask you a question, but go ahead and tell me what your, there's a lot of negotiation that goes on. We use the history, in this case I said learner, to form instructional recommendations. I'm not sure of that. We negotiate strategic goals, we negotiate means, goals, and means. So here's what that means. Oh, you know, I've been wanting to talk to you for a long time. Oh yes, I wanted to talk to you for a long time. And do you have just a minute? Can we sit over here in this little alcove and just, have you got just a second to talk to me? Or you can say, look, I don't have time to talk to you, but can I send you an email about this thing, and will you give it a little consideration? Now, you say, wow, these are all trivial things. But I don't think they are. Does a learner decide, go through this process of negotiating with us, how deeply they want this thing to go, and how committed they are to it? Now, and yeah, Janelle.
Like, you asked if it's trivial, and I have some friends who study special education, and I think they would know very well that it's not trivial, but it's a very important thing. And sometimes the instruction, from what I've heard, not from personal experience, but from what I've heard, sometimes the instruction that they offer is better because they pay more attention to these seemingly trivial things.
That's right. We take so many things for granted. We frank on each other.
Will that question be on the test? I'm just negotiating.
That's right. That's a negotiation. How much do I have to listen? How does confidence come? I have down here, negotiate roles and establish mutual confidence. How does that, why? Why is that there? And does it really need to be there? Are these things that we do? Can you give me an example of negotiating roles? How do we do that? Remember, we're a chance encounter in the hall with another person. We're deciding whether or not we're going to converse. And if so, what's the nature of that conversation going to be? Negotiate roles.
A lot of times those roles are kind of decided by convention to some extent. I mean, if I see a professor in the hall, I'm not gonna probably ask him about his kids, just because I know him as a professor. I'm like, oh, how's your research going, or whatever.
How's your indigestion today? Yeah. There's stuff there. So there are some pre-negotiated roles, but if I talk to Darren, I can actually negotiate the role between us by saying, look, Darren, I've got an assignment for you for class. So all of a sudden, I'm speaking this way to Darren. Or Darren might say, Dr. Gibbons, I've got some things that we need to deal with because of one of your teachers who's teaching an independent studies course, and all of a sudden the conversation is this way. And sometimes it's this way, sometimes it's this way. Okay? Sometimes it's just, we negotiate as we go. Now, does that negotiation of roles and content, goals, does that change moment by moment? It's a dynamic thing, isn't it? Why doesn't our literature on instructional design spell this kind of stuff out for us so that we understand some things that we've been glossing over? We have not paid attention to the idea that instruction is a conversation. We have started to look at instructional design as being centered around the hard and soft technologies. And we have forgotten instruction. Okay? Establishing mutual confidence. Anna?
I've been so good not saying anything. I've got more than enough for us to talk about in the course.
I can see.
But yeah, I know. This whole thing about conversation, one thing that happens with conversation is it's the two people conversing. And what normally happens is conversation, I think this is one of the problems when you say what's wrong with the field and traditionally, is so often when we're in conversation, we spend all of our time thinking while the other person is talking, we're thinking about what we're going to say next.
Not really listening.
And not being an active listener. The definition to me of an active listener is you're listening to somebody, what is the next thing they're going to talk about? It's a different way of looking at it, and I think as instructional designers, too often, we only do instructional design when there's a problem, so we're coming in with the answer. And what we come in is we're not doing active listening. We're not really paying attention to what the situation is, what the problem is, what the other person's saying. We come in also figuring out what we're going to say next, and we come in with the answer.
That's right.
Without doing the listening part of a true two-part conversation.
That's right. We create events after event after event, and they take place in a certain sequence. And we don't even provide for an active listener at key junctures of the instruction. Okay, it's something to think about. Establishing mutual confidence. What does that have to do with it? At the beginning of a conversation.
Actually, to relate this back to like active listening, I think they're very intertwined. Like, I went to this, I was just at an improv workshop, it was just random. And so they're actually talking about improv, and one of the things they talk about is avoiding the temptation to like think about what you want to say next, or coming up with some fun joke, and just really just being in the moment, like what's happening in the scene we're creating together. And a huge part of that, they said, was really just trusting the other people that they're going to make it work, and you can kind of just relax and just really get into it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, it was a huge part of it, like that trust in the people. And I think when you have that trust, you don't have to like kind of tense up and like think about how you can like steer the conversation to where you want it to go. It's just like this easy exchange of ideas.
It becomes an exchange, doesn't it? One of the things that I really have enjoyed this semester, and Janelle's in that class, Jay's in that class, Melissa's in the class, Isaac is there, Curtis is, you're in the class? He doesn't want to be in the class because I give him a hard assignment. We have a class. Curtis, describe how that, and you guys, describe how this class works. What are we doing?
A big conversation. Deciding what goal we want to have throughout the semester and what we're going to do to accomplish it. There's a lot of give and take and improv.
We're making it up as we go, aren't we? It's and what's our topic, Isaac?
We started by pretty much reading the entire Regaluth Green Book, Volume 2, and then picked some theories to really dive into, and then we're writing a paper together on a proposed framework of critical thinking.
As applied to instructional theory.
As applied to instructional theory.
Has it led to some moments where you said, oh my gosh, and all of a sudden, yeah. Now, how do you do that with technology-based instruction? How do you lead to moments where all of a sudden the lights go on for a big idea? Or where the student realizes that they participated in creating a new piece of knowledge in some way? Now these are challenges, and the only reason I'm not saying that this class is how every class ought to be conducted, although it's been a great experience for the instructor, I think, as well as the students. Because we are creating new knowledge, we're listening to each other, and we have built confidence over each other. That took a little doing at the first of the class, didn't it? You guys didn't know whether to trust me or not, because you were so worried about your grades. And then finally, we have actually joined as colleagues in learning something new. We have all learned something out of this. So confidence
So are you saying that all instruction is a conversation, or that it ought to be?
I'm saying that it is.
Some of it's a really
Bad
bad conversation.
Yes, like,
Definitely awkward conversation you wish you could get out of.
okay, today we're going to talk about the Krebs cycle. The Krebs cycle is yada, 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 and so-and-so bonds with such and such, and then this, okay, and their notes, okay? That's a really bad conversation, but it is a conversation. Where's the other side of that conversation?
On Facebook.
Actually, it multiplies, rate your teacher kind of thing. Okay. But what does the instructor think the other side of the conversation is? I'm going to give you a quiz, and you're going to tell me. I'm going to decide what you're going to tell me, and if you don't tell me the right way, I will scorn you and give you that grade, ruin your future.
Yeah, I agree.
You like that?
100%. I also think that using the term conversation to describe an instruction does not necessarily mean that taking more than 30 seconds to say something as an instructor is evil. Like I've been in conversations, real life ones, where it's like somebody's telling me something so exciting, and it's like, do you have anything to say about that? No, tell me more about it. Let's keep talking. I want to talk, I want to listen. And like, so just having somebody talk for a while isn't wrong,
evil.
Just because it's a conversation, you know?
So conversations have different dimensions, don't they? How many different dimensions can you think of that a conversation has? For instance, let's talk about some instances. If I'm standing here talking to Stephanie, and we're having a conversation, that's a typical conversation. What if we're doing something, and I move into the other room, and she's doing something over in the other room, and we're just elevating our voices, and we're still talking? That's a conversation, isn't it? What if I call Stephanie, and I say, Steph, yada, 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 and she's on the phone with me, and that's a conversation, right? What if I write Stephanie an email message and mail it to her, and she sends it back to me? That's a conversation. What if I'm a writer, and I write a book, and then I die, and somebody reads a chapter in the book and says, well, I don't agree with that, or I agree with that, and I see he missed the following ideas, and writes another book? Is that a kind of conversation? Conversing with the past, conversing with the great ideas of the past. There's a book by a fellow named Harold Bloom, excuse me. It's called A Map of Misprision. A map of something. Here's what he's talking about. He's saying every poet since Milton, and Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained. He says every poet since Milton has been responding to and conversing with Milton. And his whole book is about that. It's a hard read. I wouldn't recommend it unless you're really like an English major, which I was, okay? But what he's showing is that, Matthew Arnold, when he wrote Dover Beach, was actually answering something that Milton had said in his poetry. And even the people who didn't see the world the same way were somehow responding to a question that he had raised. So there's this great conversation of ideas. Now, as we teach people, we're trying to engage them in a conversation. We're trying to bring them into a conversation that we are already a part of, aren't we? Okay. So confidence is a part of that. Establishing criteria for success. See, some of these are hard. We're still just the first part of the conversation, by the way. We have not actually entered into the body of the conversation.
So you said something really interesting too that I think is an important piece is when you have conversations, there are people that come in and out of those conversations in different ways. And there's probably another whole sort of set of protocols on how do you bring somebody in appropriately, kind of catch them up without replaying the whole thing.
Yes.
Involving them in a way that they feel like they're involved. Like that's even that piece of, and then when somebody leaves, how do you leave appropriately?
Absolutely, absolutely. establishing productivity expectations, reminding relevant content, reminding of prior learning experience. Now, what is this reminiscent of? Gaining attention, establishing prior knowledge. Sounds like Gagne, doesn't it? One of the things that we've done is we've stopped at Gagne. We said, oh, Gagne, he was so good. He gave us these 9 events. And that's all we need is the 9 events. And we have stopped being curious. We've stopped turning over rocks to see what's underneath them. We've stopped thinking critically. We've stopped being analytic. As instructional designers, you cannot, now the kind of instructional designers you guys are going to be, you cannot do that. You can not allow yourself to stop being analytic and stop being critical thinkers. So what I've really given you here is an example of an area of instructional design where you probably ought to be more curious. Why? So Anna, tell us, you were talking earlier in your session. It was a great session for those of you who weren't there. Tell us some of the things, as you were looking at the Horizon report, can just bring us up to speed on the Horizon report and some of the things that you saw in that might affect this idea of conversation.
Okay, conversations, talking, a Horizon report is New Media Consortium, and they look at what is the trends that they see that they've identified 1 year out, 2 to 3 years out, and then 5 years out. So it gives you kind of an idea. You know, they're talking about mobile apps and those kind of things that we know that are taking over our world. So those are the kinds of things we're looking at right now. But also learning analytics. What do we know about our learners? How do we do interventions to help? Again, how do we, on an individual basis? We're starting to gather data instantly on what our students are doing, what they're looking at, how they're reacting in different situations, and using that data then to inform that instructional design, which is a very dynamic, just-in-time situation we've never had before.
Yeah.
Instead of designing something that's going to be implemented next week, we're talking about something 20 minutes, if that.
Yeah.
That kind of thing, so that's really important. Looking at augmented reality, where you can, you know, use your mobile phone, take a, you know, point it at a corner, and I want to see what happened on this corner 250 years ago. Show me what is happening here. So you're layering information, and think about designers, what this means. But you're layering information onto a, you know, identifies the geographic location by the image, and identifies that, and then gives you those layers of what happened 250 years before that. Or where's the closest, you know, ladies' room, or you know, McDonald's or whatever, you know, especially in a foreign country, it's really important sometimes. But those kind of things, so that's kind of haptic interfaces, which is, again, how do you design this? Talk about conversations, but haptic is your textile, all your senses. So how do you use that? Give an example that's being done at UC in Berkeley, at UC LA, with Richard Clark, where they're working with folks coming back from the war, post-traumatic syndrome, and they recreate the events that caused that traumatic event. They actually recreate it through the immersive goggles, and then the hands, and they're in chairs, and the sound and smells and all of that, and recreating it, and then working through folks step by step to, so that, again, and how do you design it? There's a conversation that's unbelievable, recreating an event and doing that. So the world of design is totally changing. I've always said, you know, we can't design for the choice. We can't design for the technology. We have to design for learning. And who are our learners, and how do we deal with this? Because they're different learners, it's a different world. And so trying to make sure that we have that foundation, I think, is critical.
Richard, you've been involved with the learning analytics kinds of things. How serious do you see that as a future trend?
Oh, yeah, it's, so I think one of the things, when I look at it, we just did a report, by the way, we released a report on learning analytics and where we think it's going to be going. But I think it's becoming very quickly impossible to meet the types of requirements that we're asking if we don't start to look at data in different ways. And there will be some, you know, intermediate steps before we get to big data, but I even look at, I was just looking at an example from a school at ASU, where they're using learning analytics to bring in and take a look at patterns that people are going through and helping identify before the student does where they would most likely be able to get help if they need to move on. Right? It says, at this point, that 600 other students just like you that went through this part and got stuck here found that talking to this one professor was very helpful. Guess what? That's probably going to be helpful for you as well. And I think the one important thing to remember, people get convoluted a little bit, is having big data and knowing these ideas don't take away choice from students. They help them make more informed choices. And we think about like Netflix, right? I use Netflix and it's changed the way that I look at movies. But at the end of the day, I can still search for, stranger than fiction. And if that's not the thing that it recommended for me, I still have the choice. But it helps tee up way better decisions than I would ever make if it was back in the Blockbuster days when I wandered around for hours staring at all these choices and then walked out because I finally could never decide what I was doing. And so that's the idea, is how do we use this data to help students make better choices?
So what we're talking about is conversations that are guided by data. That is, we actually know what we might say to the learner next. We might do that. Mike, are you?
No, I'm sorry, I was just exercising my hand.
Okay.
Not just that, Andy, I think a part of that has to do with knowing the learner. And, I come in, I know Rich, right? And I know how he's going to react to certain things. I know what I can say, what I can't say. The same is true with everybody in my family, right? I've got 9 brothers and sisters. I don't talk to them all the same way.
Yeah.
Right? There's certain ones that I'm going to be a little more careful with. I'm like, oh, don't mention that, you know.
Some topics.
Other ones that I'm totally going to rile up just for fun, but I know it's okay, right? But and that's the data analytics is we've been teaching blind in many ways. We talk about learner analysis. We've talked about it forever, but now we're talking not about doing a learner analysis, putting it aside, and now designing the instruction. Now we're saying we're getting this constant feedback that we're used to in life, but now we have more means to be able to apply that to our instructional situations to say, ooh, I just said something that was a little offensive and I could tell from the way that they reacted, or I said something they didn't react the way I would have even normally expected them to react. But I can only know how I would normally expect them to react if I have that data from that prior data of how I've seen them react previously.
You know, the big Adobe building out here at the point of the mountain, I think they're building 2 more out there, I think, just like that. They're planning on building 2 more, if I remember correctly. That whole area up against Traverse Mountain on the south side is going to be industry. And Adobe they're big, and there's going to be others that are going to be big too. What do they do in the Adobe building? What part of their business do they care? A bunch of programmers in there programming new Flash or?
Omniture mostly.
Huh?
It's omniture. It's like web analytics.
Web analytics.
It's web analytics. There are businesses who, that are adjusting themselves to you by offering you certain things and trying to adjust you to them by offering you certain things. They are narrowing the niche and learning how to approach you. Now that's worrisome in one respect, but I had a chance to sit next at lunch one day to the guy at Pandora who was responsible for their music indexing process. You know, every piece of music on Pandora. You guys use Pandora? You ought to go train you a couple of radio stations if you haven't. It's amazing because, for instance, I have a station on Pandora that's nothing but this ethereal kind of music, because that works well when I'm working. It doesn't give me, a rock beat. It makes me want to dance instead of write. And so I trained this station not to give me violin and not to give me piano. And ever so often it'll try to slip a piece of piano on me, so I just give it a thumbs down, and I don't have to worry about it again for a long time. It knows exactly what I want. Why? Because every song, at least at the time I talked to this guy, and that was 4 or 5 years ago, over at the UVU conference, every song has over 130 different indexes, tags. They know the kinds of instruments that are playing, the style, whether it's a group or an individual, or whether it's even a name. They know so much about, they know the pace, the beat, the the type of music that it is, the genre that it fits into, 130 different descriptors. And so they can give you the more information they have about the thing they're delivering to you, the more you tell them what you want, the more they can focus and give you exactly what you want. That's a conversation. Okay? So not only is instruction a conversation, but interacting with people is a conversation, for services, for business. Okay, so here's the reason I'm bringing this up. As instructional designers, we need to be aware of this nature of instruction. And we need to move that metaphor of conversation to the heart of our designs, not just a nice little feature that we put on the outside. We need to think of our designs in terms of how they are a conversation. Okay, so thank you, you've been really patient. Questions before we adjourn? That's kind of where we wanted to end up. Yeah.
So like, I mean, I imagine the reason that, this is kind of tradition and so is just that kind of it's difficult, like 1 to 30, or if you look at MOOCs, 1 to thousands, like this ratio, like, I mean, how do we overcome like those impracticalities of actually having
size? I don't know.
Engaging in conversation.
The conversation's still going on. It's just the dynamic is changing. So even a MOOC with 50,000 people, most of them, what I read is most of them are depending more upon peer feedback and peer conversation. So you have folks that have the same interest you have in some diverse subjects, and then they become communities of practice. So there's still very much a conversation when it works, so much a conversation. But it's within that, and then it's not about the final grade or the diploma or whatever, it's about the learning to you. Whole different dynamic, and it's not for everybody.
So like in that case, it seems like the focus would shift from like being a good conversationalist yourself to being a good facilitator of conversations.
A designer of conversations. Think in those terms, a designer of conversation. Puts a whole new spin on it. Well, thank you very much. It's been Richard and Lana. Thank you very much for your time.